Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
It all started when I returned home after 9 grueling months overseas. My job rarely required travel, but this time, I had to oversee the setup of a new plant in another country. It was supposed to be a short trip, but delays and complications stretched it into nearly a year. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and eager to sleep in my own bed, surrounded by the peace and quiet of my 25-acre property. That land had been in my family for generations, and it was more than just a place to live. It was my sanctuary. But when I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. There were cars parked where they shouldn't be, and construction equipment littered the edge of my property. My stomach churned as I approached my front door, only to find that my keys didn't work. Confused, I knocked on the door. A man I'd never seen before answered, looking at me like was the intruder. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone curt. The man stood in the doorway, his posture defensive, eyeing me suspiciously. He was middle-aged, with a receding hairline and glasses perched on his nose. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep calm despite the rising panic in my chest. My hands were shaking slightly, and I clenched them into fists. "This is my house. Who are you?" The man's frown deepened, and he crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Your house, no, this is house. I bought it a few months ago." His voice was firm, almost challenging. I blinked rapidly, certain I hadn't heard him right. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. "What are you talking about? I didn't sell my house." My voice cracked slightly on the last word. The man sighed, clearly annoyed. "Look, I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, but I have all the paperwork. This property was purchased legally." I ran a hand through my hair, struggling to process what I was hearing. There must be some mistake. I've lived here for years. I was just away on business. "Well, then you must have arranged the sale before you left," he replied, his tone growing impatient. "Because I assure you I didn't break in and start squatting." "Well," he said, shrugging as if this was no big deal, "you must have forgotten or something because I have the deed." I took a step closer, my voice rising. "No, you don't understand. I would never sell this place. It's been in my family for generations." The man's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you continue to harass me, I'll be forced to call the police." "Call them," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. "Please call them, because someone has made a huge mistake here." He started to close the door. "I'm not arguing about this anymore. Goodbye." As the door slammed shut in my face, I stood there, stunned and disbelieving, staring at what should have been my own front door. I stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. Then I demanded to see the paperwork. He shut the door in my face. The next morning, after spending a sleepless night in a cheap motel, I went straight to the county clerk's office to figure out what was going on. That's when the nightmare unraveled. According to official records, I had sold my house and land to none other than Bruce Campbell, the smug president of the HOA that had been harassing me for years. Bruce Campbell and his HOA cronies had been a thorn in my side ever since they formed their little suburban dictatorship next door. When a developer bought up the farmland adjacent to mine and turned it into cookie-cutter houses with pristine lawns and white picket fences, Bruce saw himself as some kind of kingpin. He tried everything to get me to join their HOA. Letters, visits, even bribes. But I refused every time. My land wasn't part of their development. It never had been and never would be. When persuasion didn't work, Bruce resorted to threats and fines. He claimed that my property violated HOA rules. Rules that didn't even apply to me because I wasn't part of their association. We'd gone to court over it before, and I won handily. That should have been the end of it. But clearly Bruce wasn't done with me. Armed with this new information about the supposed sale of my property, I marched over to Bruce's house. He lived in one of those oversized McMansions that screamed compensation. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, his face twisted into an insincere smile. "Well, look who's back," he said smugly, his lips curling into a self-satisfied grin. Bruce stood in the doorway of his oversized house, looking every bit the pompous HOA president he was. "What the hell did you do?" I demanded, my fists clenched at my sides. I could feel my face flushing with anger as I glared at him. He feigned innocence, spreading his hands wide. "I don't know what you're talking about." His voice dripped with false concern. "Is something wrong?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I spat, taking a step closer. "You sold my house while I was out of the country." Bruce leaned against his doorframe like he didn't have a care in the world. His posture was relaxed, almost mocking. "You sold it to me fair and square," he said, with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Don't you remember signing the papers?" "I did no such thing." My voice was rising now, echoing down the street. A few neighbors poked their heads out to see what the commotion was about. "You forged documents or something. This is fraud." Bruce's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smirk remained. He shrugged like it was all beneath him, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his sleeve. "That's a serious accusation," he said coolly. "If you really believe that, there's a simple solution." He paused for effect. "Take it up with the courts." I stood there, seething, as Bruce's words hung in the air between us. The smug satisfaction on his face told me he thought he had won. But I wasn't about to let him get away with this. "Oh, I will," I growled, pointing a finger at his chest. "And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd never even heard my name." Bruce's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Good luck with that," he said, his tone dismissive. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important HOA business to attend to." As he started to close the door, I called out, "This isn't over, Bruce. Not by a long shot." The door shut with a final click, leaving me standing on his porch, my mind racing with plans for the legal battle ahead. The court battle that followed was nothing short of a circus. Bruce had somehow managed to forge a mountain of fake documents, everything from a falsified deed transfer to forged signatures that supposedly belonged to me. He even had fake witnesses lined up who claimed they'd seen me sign the paperwork before leaving for my trip. But Bruce underestimated just how far I was willing to go to fight for what was mine. He had no idea of the depths of my determination or the reserves of strength I could draw upon when pushed to the brink. This wasn't just about a house or a piece of land. It was about my heritage, my home, and my sense of justice. I was prepared to move mountains, drain my savings, and dedicate every waking moment to exposing his fraud and reclaiming what he had stolen from me. Bruce might have thought he was dealing with just another easy mark, someone he could bully and deceive without consequences. But he was about to learn that he had picked the wrong person to cross. I was ready for war, and I wouldn't rest until I had torn down everything he had built on his web of lies and deceit. I hired one of the best attorneys in town, a bulldog of a lawyer named Carla, who lived for cases like this. She tore through Bruce's lies like tissue paper. We subpoenaed every scrap of evidence we could find, emails, phone records, bank statements, anything that could prove Bruce had orchestrated this fraud. The turning point came when Carla discovered an email chain between Bruce and one of his HOA board members discussing their plan to acquire my property while I was out of town. The emails were damning. They outlined everything from forging documents to bribing county officials to expedite the fraudulent sale. When confronted with this evidence in court, Bruce's cocky demeanor crumbled like a sandcastle in high tide. The transformation was almost immediate. Gone was the smug, self-assured man who had strutted into the courtroom as though he owned it. His face turned a deep shade of red as beads of sweat began to form on his forehead, and his hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of his jacket. Carla, my lawyer, didn't let up for a second. She stood tall and commanding, her voice sharp and precise as she fired off question after question. "So, Mr. Campbell," she began, pacing slowly in front of the witness stand, "can you explain why your email account contains messages detailing plans to forge property documents?" Bruce stammered, his voice cracking as he tried to respond. I don't know what you're talking about. Those emails, they're not mine." Carla raised an eyebrow and held up a printed copy of one of the emails. "Not yours, because this email address is registered under your name, correct?" Bruce shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting toward his lawyer for help. His lawyer avoided eye contact, clearly realizing the case was unraveling. I mean, I don't remember sending that," Bruce stuttered. Carla leaned in closer, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, you don't remember? That's convenient. Let me refresh your memory." She turned to the judge and handed over a stack of evidence. "Your Honor, Exhibit 14 clearly shows correspondence between Mr. Campbell and other parties discussing fraudulent activities related to this case." Bruce's breathing grew heavier as he wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. The courtroom was silent except for Carla's voice slicing through the air like a knife. "Mr. Campbell," she continued, her voice growing colder, "are you seriously asking this court to believe that someone hacked your email account, forged your signature on multiple documents, and orchestrated an entire scheme, all without your knowledge?" Bruce opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man drowning in quicksand, struggling to find something, anything, to cling to. "Answer the question," Carla demanded, her tone now razor sharp. I don't know," Bruce finally mumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The judge leaned forward, peering over his glasses at Bruce. "Mr. Campbell," he said sternly, "you are under oath. I suggest you take this opportunity to tell the truth." Bruce's voice cracked again as he muttered something unintelligible. "I'm sorry," Carla said mockingly, cupping her ear with one hand. "What was that? Speak up for the court." I didn't mean for it to go this far," Bruce blurted out suddenly, his voice loud and desperate. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as everyone leaned forward in their seats. Carla didn't miss a beat. "So you admit it? "You admit to orchestrating this fraud?" Bruce hesitated for a moment before nodding weakly. His head hung low as if the weight of his lies had finally crushed him. The judge banged his gavel once to restore order in the courtroom before turning back to Bruce with a look of utter disdain. As Bruce sat there sweating and stammering under Carla's relentless questioning, it became painfully clear that his carefully constructed facade had completely collapsed under the weight of the truth. But it didn't stop there. As we dug deeper into Bruce's activities, we uncovered even more skeletons in his closet. Turns out he'd been running scams like this for years, targeting homeowners who were elderly or frequently out of town and tricking them into selling their properties under false pretenses. Several other victims came forward during the trial, each with their own horror stories about how Bruce had stolen their homes. By the time the trial ended, Bruce wasn't just facing civil penalties, he was facing criminal charges too. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, you name it. They threw the book at him. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. Not only did I get my house and land back, but Bruce was ordered to pay me substantial damages for emotional distress and lost income, since part of my property included rental. The HOA itself was dissolved as part of the settlement, its assets liquidated to compensate other victims of Bruce's schemes. Watching Bruce being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But even after all that vindication, returning home wasn't easy. My house had been gutted during renovations by its temporary occupants. Walls torn down, floors ripped up, and parts of my land had been bulldozed for construction projects that were never completed. It took months, and most of Bruce's settlement money, to restore everything back to its original state. But eventually, things returned to normal, or as normal as they could be after such an ordeal. As for Bruce, last I heard, he'd been sentenced to several years in prison without parole. A fitting end for someone who thought they could steal from me and get away with it. I still live on that 25-acre property today, a little older and a lot wiser about how far some people will go for greed, but one thing's for sure, no one will ever take what's mine again. Holy crap, talk about a nightmare scenario. Imagine coming home after months away and finding out some jerk sold your house right from under you. And not just any house, but one that's been in your family for generations. That HOA president is pure evil. The amount of planning and deception that must have gone into this scheme is mind-boggling. It's like something out of a movie, except it actually happened to someone. At least there was justice in the end, but man, what an ordeal to go through. I can't even imagine how stressful this must have been for the homeowner. Like, you work hard, own your land, mind your own business, then some power-hungry HOA dude decides to steal everything from you. That's messed up, and the fact that he almost got away with it is scary. Good thing the lawyer found those emails. Goes to show you gotta be careful with HOAs and always keep an eye on your property. Glad the HOA got shut down in the end. Hope that Bruce guy never sees the outside of a jail cell again. The audacity of this HOA president is truly astounding. To think he could simply forge documents and sell someone's generational property without consequences speaks volumes about his character and the corrupt nature of his organization. The emotional toll on the homeowner must have been immense, having to fight tooth and nail to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. It's a stark reminder of how easily our rights can be violated when those in positions of power abuse their authority. The dissolution of the HOA and Bruce's imprisonment are fitting punishments, but one has to wonder how many other homeowners have fallen victim to similar schemes without the means or determination to fight back. This case should serve as a wake-up call for stricter oversight of HOAs and harsher penalties for those who exploit their positions for personal gain.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.